hard to imagine that we can just ignore this letter and pretend that discussions are undergoing in some sort of...
President Donald Trump has reignited a trade clash with Canada, announcing a 35% tariff on Canadian goods starting in August and threatening a 50% tariff on copper imports. But what caught attention is not only the size of the tariffs, but the reason. Trump is tying trade directly to the fentanyl crisis in the United States, blaming Canada for failing to stop the flow of the drug. This marks a new stage in Trump's negotiating style, using a deadly public health emergency as a bargaining chip in trade talks. Trump's strategy, turning a crisis into leverage. Tariffs have always been Trump's favorite weapon in negotiations. From China to Mexico, he has used them to force concessions. But now, by linking tariffs to fentanyl, he is widening their scope. They are no longer just about jobs or trade deficits. They are about security and public safety. This tactic plays well politically. It allows Trump to argue he is protecting American lives, not just American factories. At the same time, it shifts blame outward, making Canada appear responsible for America's fentanyl problem. Canada's delicate position. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded carefully. He stressed Canada's progress in fighting fentanyl and promised cooperation. He also extended the trade deadline from July 21st to August 3rd, buying time to reach a deal. But Canada is in a bind. Yielding too much risked weakening its independence in setting policy. Resisting too firmly risked immediate economic pain from tariffs. Carney must balance diplomacy abroad with credibility at home, knowing his country's economy is deeply tied to the U.S. The economic risks? If the tariffs take effect, both countries will feel the shock. Metals. A 50% copper tariff would raise costs for U.S. industries from construction to electronics. Agriculture. Higher tariffs on Canadian food would push up U.S. grocery bills. Manufacturing and autos. Supply chains that cross the border daily could be disrupted, raising production costs. While Trump frames tariffs as punishment for Canada, American businesses and consumers will also pay. Prices would rise, investment could slow, and confidence in North American trade could weaken. The stick and the carrot. Trump's letter also offered an escape. Canadian companies could avoid tariffs if they move production into the United States. This is classic Trump, threatening penalties while dangling the promise of jobs in America. He also repeated his claim that Canada imposes 400% tariffs on U.S. dairy products. Trade experts dispute this figure, but it serves Trump's political goal of showing American farmers he is fighting for them. Negotiations under pressure. Even with the extended deadline, analysts doubt talks are on a stable track. One Canadian observer called Trump a madman in the White House, reflecting the sense of unpredictability. For Canada, the real danger is not only the tariffs, but the uncertainty of Trump's approach. Even if a deal is struck, he could change course quickly. That instability discourages investment and makes it harder for businesses to plan. It also pushes Canada to consider long-term alternatives, like strengthening ties with Europe and Asia to reduce reliance on the U.S. Conclusion. Trump has turned the fentanyl crisis into a trade weapon, showing once again his willingness to blur the line between domestic politics and international economics. For Canada, the stakes are high. Cooperate too much and risk losing independence. Resist too much and face heavy economic damage. For the U.S., the tariffs may generate headlines and political support, but they also carry economic costs and risk shaking the foundation of North American trade. The broader lesson is clear. In Trump's America, trade negotiations are not just about deficits or industries. They are about power, pressure, and the willingness to use any crisis, even one measured in lost lives, as a bargaining chip.
It will now cost even more to import goods from Canada.
And while you were sleeping, President Trump increased tariffs on Canadian imports to 35%. That's up from 25%, and that is effective today. He says that our neighbor to the north has
imports
not...
from 25% to 35% on imports not included in the U.S.-Canada-Mexico trade agreement. The president saying it's because of fentanyl flow into the U.S.
Straight to the point. President Donald Trump has escalated the trade war with America's closest neighbor. In a surprise move, he raised tariffs on Canadian imports to 35%, citing Canada's failure to stop the flow of fentanyl into the United States. This decision, effective immediately, jolts U.S.-Canada trade relations, threatens Detroit's auto industry, and means higher prices for American families. The big question is this a smart negotiating strategy, or a costly gamble that could backfire. Trump's decision and his rationale. The numbers tell the story. Tariffs on Canadian goods outside the U.S. Mexico-Canada agreement jumped from 25 to 35% overnight. That includes lumber, steel, aluminum, and cars, products central to both economies. Trump tied the move directly to the opioid crisis. In an open letter to Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, he accused Canada of failing to stop fentanyl shipments into the U.S. and declared tariffs would remain until Ottawa cooperates. At the same time, Trump unveiled broader tariff plans affecting nearly 70 countries, with rates between 10 and 41% depending on trade balances. He framed it all as protecting American workers, but critics note a flaw. Carney pointed out that Canada accounts for just 1% of fentanyl entering the U.S., casting doubt on Trump's explanation. Canada pushes back Carney's response. Prime Minister Carney answered with calm but firm language. He acknowledged the seriousness of the fentanyl crisis but rejected the idea that Canada is a major source. He emphasized that Ottawa is already cooperating with U.S. agencies and pledged to continue doing so. Carney also admitted that Canadian industries, and especially lumber, metals, and autos, would be hit hard. Still, he promised measures to protect Canadian jobs and stabilize the economy. The contrast could not be sharper. Trump relies on pressure and threats, while Carney highlights cooperation and damage control. The trade dispute has become not only an economic clash, but also a test of leadership styles. The auto industry takes the hit. The most visible fallout is in Detroit. The U.S. auto sector depends heavily on Canadian parts and raw materials. Now, the tariff shock is showing up in corporate losses. General Motors lost $1 billion in the second quarter and warns of a $45 billion hit for the year. Stellantis reported $2.7 billion in losses in the first half of 2025. Ford expects to lose $2 billion this year after paying $800 million in tariffs in just one quarter. For these companies, tariffs mean higher costs for essential inputs. That squeezes profit margins, reduces future investment, and threatens American jobs in factories across Michigan and beyond. The irony is clear. A policy meant to defend U.S. workers is damaging one of the country's most iconic industries. The consumer price tag. The damage doesn't stop at factory gates. For ordinary Americans, tariffs are a hidden tax. Economists estimate that the average family will pay about $2,400 more per year as import costs filter down into higher prices for cars, housing materials, and everyday goods. This undermines household budgets, fuels inflation, and risks slowing consumer spending. The backbone of the U.S. economy. Instead of making life more affordable, Trump's tariffs are making it more expensive. Trump's negotiating tactic. Why push so hard? For Trump, tariffs are more than economic policy. They are a negotiation weapon. Deadlines have been set and reset, from July 21 to August 1 and now August 7th. The goal is to keep Canada under constant pressure. This high-pressure tactic is a trademark of Trump's style. He creates crises, then uses them to force concessions. But the gamble is risky. Canada could refuse to give in and instead deepen ties with Europe or Asia, reducing reliance on the U.S. If that happens, Trump's pressure campaign may weaken America's position rather than strengthen it. The global trade war context. Canada is just the beginning. Trump's new executive order extends tariffs to nearly 70 countries, covering a wide range of imports. If these measures fully take effect, they would touch almost every corner of U.S. trade. The risk is that allies respond by forming new partnerships that bypass the U.S. Supply chains could shift permanently, and global markets may learn to function without depending on American demand. What Trump presents as strength may, over time, erode U.S. leadership in global trade. Conclusion: a double-edged sword. Trump's 35% tariff on Canadian goods is more than a policy change. It is a high-stakes test of his entire economic strategy. On the surface, he looks tough, using tariffs to demand action and concessions. But the immediate consequences are troubling. The auto industry is losing billions. Families are facing thousands in extra costs, and allies are questioning whether the U.S. is still a reliable trade partner. Prime Minister Carney's calm rebuttal highlights the contrast. Trump thrives on confrontation, while Canada seeks cooperation. The outcome remains uncertain. Will Canada yield under pressure, or will Trump's gamble backfire on American workers and consumers? For now, one thing is undeniable. Tariffs have once again become Trump's weapon of choice, and both countries are bracing for the storm it unleashes.